Historical context. The Secret Battle of Sydney Harbour refers to a series of Japanese submarine attacks on Sydney, Australia, during World War II, highlighting the vulnerability of coastal cities to enemy naval assaults. Objective of the story. This narrative aims to delve into the events surrounding the Japanese submarine attacks on Sydney Harbour, examining the impact on civilian morale, military response, and the secrecy surrounding the attacks. Japanese submarine operations. Japanese naval strategy. As part of its broader naval strategy in the Pacific, Japan deployed submarines to disrupt Allied shipping lanes and conduct covert reconnaissance missions. Operation M and Go. Japanese submarines I-21 and I-24 were tasked with Operation M and Go, aimed at launching attacks on Allied naval assets and infrastructure along the Australian coast. Surveillance of Sydney. Japanese submarines conducted covert surveillance of Sydney Harbour, gathering intelligence on Allied naval movements and assessing the city's defences. Initial attacks on Sydney. First attack. On May 31, 1942, Japanese submarine I-24 launched an attack on Sydney Harbour, firing torpedoes at naval vessels and infrastructure targets. Targeted ships. The torpedoes struck and damaged the depot ship HMAS Cutterbull, resulting in the loss of lives among Australian and British naval personnel. Civilian panic. The attack on Sydney Harbour caused panic among civilians, with fears of further Japanese incursions into Australian territory. Subsequent operations. Continued surveillance. Japanese submarines continued to conduct surveillance missions off the coast of Sydney, monitoring Allied naval activities and potential targets. Second attack. On June 8, 1942, Japanese submarine I-21 launched a second attack on Sydney Harbour, targeting merchant ships and naval vessels. Strategic targets. The attack damaged several merchant ships and naval vessels, including the USS Chicago, an American cruiser stationed in Sydney Harbour at the time. Military response and countermeasures. Anti-submarine measures. In response to the Japanese submarine threat, Allied naval forces deployed anti-submarine patrols and increased surveillance of Sydney Harbour. Naval escorts. Merchant ships travelling to and from Sydney were provided with naval escorts to protect against potential submarine attacks. Sonar detection. Advanced sonar technology was employed to detect and track enemy submarines operating in the vicinity of Sydney Harbour. Secrecy and government response. Secrecy surrounding attacks. The Australian government imposed strict censorship measures to prevent public panic and maintain morale in the face of the Japanese submarine attacks. Public statements. Official statements downplayed the severity of the attacks, emphasizing the effectiveness of Allied defenses and the limited damage inflicted by the Japanese submarines. Internal inquiries. Behind the scenes, government officials conducted internal inquiries to assess the vulnerabilities exposed by the Japanese submarine attacks and improve coastal defenses. Legacy and impact. Psychological impact. The Japanese submarine attacks on Sydney Harbour had a significant psychological impact on the Australian population, highlighting the vulnerability of coastal cities to enemy naval incursions. Strategic significance. While the attacks did not inflict extensive damage on Sydney's infrastructure, they underscored the strategic importance of maintaining robust coastal defences and anti-submarine measures. Naval warfare tactics. The Secret Battle of Sydney Harbour served as a case study in naval warfare tactics and the challenges of defending coastal cities against submarine attacks. Remembrance and commemoration. Memorialization. The sacrifices of those who lost their lives in the Japanese submarine attacks on Sydney Harbour are commemorated through memorials and remembrance ceremonies. Educational initiatives. Efforts are made to educate future generations about the Secret Battle of Sydney Harbour, ensuring that the lessons learned from this chapter of history are not forgotten. Subscribe for more untold stories. Subscribe to our channel for additional episodes uncovering hidden narratives from World War II and beyond. Join us as we explore untold stories that shaped the course of history and the resilience of those affected by wartime challenges.